a rural beauty from Ogbomoso village, married a beggar against her family's fierce opposition, choosing love over social status and enduring years of mockery from her community. But 2 years later, when his true identity as one of Nigeria's wealthiest oil magnates is accidentally revealed, the shocking discovery drives her into complete madness, and the truth about why he deceived her will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love, pride, and the dangerous game of assumptions. Aduni was the most sought-after woman in all of Ogbomoso village. Men traveled from neighboring towns just to catch a glimpse of her radiant smile and graceful walk. Her beauty was legendary, spoken about in hushed tones at village gatherings and market squares. But when she chose to marry Kwame, a man who appeared to have nothing but the tattered clothes on his back, the entire community thought she had lost her mind. Little did they know, it was not the marriage that would drive her to madness, but the devastating truth that would emerge 2 years later. What Aduni discovered about her husband would shatter not just her world, but challenge everything the village believed about wealth, deception, and the price of pride. This is not just a tale of love and betrayal, but a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and that the cost of being wrong about someone can be far greater than we ever imagined. The morning everything changed started like any other in their small mud brick house. Aduni was preparing breakfast over the wood fire when a convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside their home. What happened next would reveal a secret so shocking, so completely devastating, that Aduni's mind would never recover from the impact. Ogbomoso village nestled in the heart of Oyo State, where red earth roads wound between clusters of traditional homes and modern concrete buildings. The village existed in that delicate balance between old and new, where ancient customs still governed daily life, but mobile phones buzzed with news from Lagos and Abuja. Here everyone knew everyone, and reputation meant everything. Aduni Oladele grew up as the pride of her family and the envy of every other household. At 24, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her dark skin glowed with health, her eyes sparkled with intelligence, and when she laughed, the sound carried across the village square like music. But it was not just her physical beauty that made her special. Aduni was educated, having completed her university degree in accounting, and she carried herself with a dignity that commanded respect. Her father, Baba Tonde, was one of the village's most respected elders. He owned a successful yam farming business and had built his family a beautiful 2-story house with modern amenities. Her mother, Mama Kemi, was known throughout the region for her exceptional cooking and her wisdom in settling family disputes. The Oladele family represented success and respectability in Ogbomoso. Given her family's status and her own accomplishments, suitors lined up like cars at a filling station. Dr. Adebayo, from the state hospital, had proposed 3 times. Engineer Olamide, who worked for the state government, sent gifts every month. Even politician Fashola's son had expressed interest, promising a life of luxury in Abuja if she would accept his proposal. The village women would gather under the ancient Iroko tree each evening, fanning themselves with dried palm fronds, while discussing the latest developments in Aduni's romantic life. "That girl can have any man she wants," old Mama Sedi would say, adjusting her head wrap. "She should choose wisely. Beauty fades, but a good husband's wealth feeds generations." Aduni's best friend, Folake, constantly reminded her of her good fortune. "Look at all these men fighting over you," Folake would tease during their evening walks. "You are sitting on a gold mine, sister. Do not waste this opportunity." But despite all the attention and excellent proposals, Aduni remained unmarried. She had standards, dreams, and a stubborn independent streak that sometimes frustrated her parents. She wanted love, not just security. She wanted a man who would see her mind as beautiful as her face, who would support her ambitions, not just her domestic duties. Her father would often lecture her during family dinners. "Aduni, you are not getting any younger. These good men will not wait forever. Choose one and settle down before your beauty begins to fade and the opportunities disappear." Her mother tried a gentler approach. "My daughter, love grows in marriage. Find a good man who can provide for you and your children. The butterflies in your stomach will not feed your family when times get hard." The pressure was constant, coming not just from family, but from the entire community. In Ogbomoso, an unmarried woman of 24 was already considered to be approaching dangerous territory. People began to whisper. Some suggested she was too proud, too choosy. Others wondered if she had some secret flaw that made her unsuitable for marriage. Village gatherings became uncomfortable for Aduni. During weddings and naming ceremonies, the elderly women would corner her with unsolicited advice and barely concealed criticism. "When I was your age, I already had 3 children," Mama Biodun would announce loudly enough for others to hear. "Young women today think they are too good for good men." The weight of expectations grew heavier with each passing month. Aduni began to feel like a prize goat being paraded at the market, examined and evaluated by potential buyers. She loved her village and her family, but she also felt trapped by their traditional expectations and limited understanding of what she truly wanted from life. Little did anyone know that fate was preparing to introduce a man who would challenge everything the village believed about wealth, status, and the true meaning of love. A man whose arrival would set in motion events that would change not just Aduni's life, but the entire community's understanding of the dangerous assumptions they made about people based on appearances alone. The first time Aduni saw Kwame, he was sitting under the mango tree near the village market, his clothes patched and faded, his feet bare and dusty. He had arrived in Ogbomoso 3 weeks earlier, claiming to be looking for work as a laborer. The village children would run past him, some throwing small stones, while others simply stared at the stranger, who seemed to have nothing but the shirt on his back. Most villagers ignored him completely. In a community where status meant everything, a man with no visible means of support was practically invisible. He would spend his days walking from house to house, asking for odd jobs, willing to carry water, sweep compounds, or help with any manual labor in exchange for a meal and a few naira. But Aduni noticed him for a different reason entirely. While others saw only his shabby appearance, she observed something unusual about this man. His posture was too straight for someone truly defeated by poverty. His speech, when she overheard him talking to potential employers, was too polished, too educated, for an ordinary beggar. Most intriguingly, his hands were too soft for someone who claimed to have worked manual labor all his life. Their first real interaction happened on a Tuesday evening, when Aduni was returning from the market, with her arms full of vegetables and grains. The bag containing her tomatoes suddenly tore, sending the red fruits rolling across the dusty road. As she bent down to gather them, feeling frustrated and embarrassed, Kwame appeared beside her. "Please, allow me to help," he said, and something in his voice made her look up. His eyes were kind, but held a depth that seemed inconsistent with his circumstances. Together they collected the scattered tomatoes, and when they finished, he looked directly at her, with a smile that was warm and genuine. "Thank you," Aduni said, surprised by how natural it felt to talk to him. "I am Aduni." "Kwame," he replied, and the way he said his name carried a quiet dignity that intrigued her. "It was my pleasure to help." From that day forward, Aduni found herself looking for Kwame whenever she went to the market. She would see him helping elderly women carry their goods, playing with children who were not afraid of him, or sitting quietly under trees reading newspapers that others had thrown away. Despite his apparent poverty, he was always clean, always polite, and always seemed to have time to help others without expecting anything in return. Their conversations began simply enough. Aduni would stop to greet him, and they would talk about the weather, village events, or current affairs. But as weeks passed, their discussions grew deeper. Kwame was remarkably well informed about politics, economics, and world events. He could discuss literature, philosophy, and even complex business concepts with an insight that amazed Aduni. "How do you know so much about international trade?" Aduni asked one afternoon, as they sat by the village stream. Kwame smiled mysteriously. "Books teach many things, and listening to people's conversations can be very educational." What struck Aduni most was how Kwame treated her. While other men saw only her beauty and focused on impressing her with their wealth or status, Kwame seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, her opinions on everything from local politics to her favorite foods. He listened when she spoke about her accounting studies, asked thoughtful questions about her ideas for starting her own business, and never once made her feel like her primary value was as a potential wife and mother. "You have a brilliant mind," he told her one evening as they walked along the village's outer paths. Any business would be fortunate to have you. Their relationship developed slowly, like a seed growing in rich soil. Kwame never pressured her, never made grand declarations, never tried to impress her with things he could not afford. Instead, he simply spent time with her, talked with her, and treated her with a respect and consideration that she had never experienced from any of her wealthy suitors. Of course, the village began to notice. At first, people were merely curious about why the educated daughter of Babatunde was spending time talking to the new beggar. But as their friendship became more obvious, the whispers grew louder and more judgmental. "What is wrong with that girl?" Mama Bayadun asked loudly at the market. "She has doctor and engineer wanting to marry her, and she is wasting time with that homeless man." Falik confronted Aduni directly. "Sister, what are you doing? People are talking. This man has nothing to offer you except shame and poverty." But Aduni found herself genuinely caring for Kwame. In his company, she felt valued for who she was, not what she represented. He made her laugh, challenged her thinking, and never once asked for anything from her, except her time and attention. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was in a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than transaction. When Kwame finally asked her to marry him, it was not with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he simply said, "Aduni, I know I cannot offer you the material things other men can, but I can promise you honesty, respect, and love that grows stronger every day. Will you build a life with me?" The proposal sent shockwaves through Ogbomoso village. The idea that the most beautiful, most eligible woman in the community would choose to marry a man with literally nothing seemed impossible to comprehend. But Aduni surprised everyone, including herself, by saying yes. She had found something with Kwame that all the wealthy suitors had failed to offer: genuine connection, intellectual partnership, and the feeling that she was valued as a complete person, rather than just a beautiful acquisition. Little did she know that this decision, made with such confidence and clarity, would eventually become the source of the most devastating revelation of her life. The wedding was a modest affair that reflected Kwame's apparent financial limitations. Instead of the elaborate ceremony that everyone expected for someone of Aduni's status, the couple exchanged vows in a simple ceremony at the village church, followed by a small reception in Babatunde's compound. The absence of the traditional expensive gifts, elaborate decorations, and grand celebration that typically marked the marriage of a woman like Aduni became the talk of the entire region. But Babatunde and Mama Kemi went through the motions of supporting their daughter's choice, but their disappointment was visible to everyone present. They had dreamed of a son-in-law who would elevate their family's status even further, not one who would drag their reputation through the village dust. "At least she is married," Mama Kemi whispered to her sister during the reception, trying to find some positive angle. Better this than remaining unmarried forever. But even as they tried to put on brave faces, the entire family felt the weight of community judgment. Relatives from other villages who had come expecting a grand celebration instead found themselves at what felt more like a funeral than a wedding. After the ceremony, Aduni moved into Kwame's tiny one-room accommodation behind Mama Sidi's house. The space was barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and their few belongings. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked during the rainy season, and they shared a communal bathroom with 3 other households. For someone who had grown up in her family's comfortable 2-story house with modern amenities, the adjustment was jarring. Their daily life required sacrifices that Aduni had never imagined. Kwame continued taking whatever odd jobs he could find, earning barely enough to buy food and pay their minimal rent. Some days he would return home with 20 naira, after a full day of carrying cement bags at construction sites. Other days he found no work at all, and they would eat once instead of 3 times. Aduni tried to contribute by offering tutoring services to village children, but many parents were reluctant to hire the wife of a beggar to teach their children. The few students she managed to attract paid very little, and even that small income was irregular. The physical hardships were difficult, but the social isolation was worse. Aduni's former friends gradually stopped visiting. Falaik still came occasionally, but their conversations became increasingly strained as the reality of Aduni's new life became apparent. "Sister, it is not too late," Falaik would whisper during these visits. "Dr. Adebayo is still unmarried. Your father could arrange something. This life you are living, this is not what you deserve." But perhaps the most painful aspect of their situation was watching how the community treated them as a couple. Aduni, who had once been greeted with smiles and respect wherever she went, now found herself the subject of pity at best and ridicule at worst. People would lower their voices when she passed, their eyes following her with expressions that mixed sympathy with judgment. "Look how far she has fallen," she overheard Mama Bayadun saying at the market. "From queen to beggar's wife. Pride goes before destruction, and that girl's pride has destroyed her completely." Kwame bore these humiliations with remarkable grace. He never complained about the way people treated him, never showed anger or resentment when others looked down on him, and never seemed bothered by the whispers that followed them wherever they went. If anything, he appeared almost amused by the situation, as if he knew something that everyone else did not. "Does it not bother you how they treat us?" Aduni asked him one evening, after a particularly difficult day when a group of young men had openly mocked them at the market. Kwame smiled, that mysterious smile that had first attracted her to him. People see what they choose to see. Their opinions say more about them than about us. The financial strain began to affect their relationship in ways Aduni had not anticipated. Simple decisions like whether to buy meat for dinner or save the money for rent became sources of stress. Aduni found herself calculating the cost of everything, turning off lights to save on electricity bills, and wearing the same few outfits repeatedly because they could not afford new clothes. Her parents' disappointment added another layer of difficulty. While they did not openly criticize her choice, their sadness was evident every time she visited. Mama Kemi would cook elaborate meals whenever Aduni came home, knowing that her daughter was probably not eating well. Baba Tunde would slip her small amounts of money, pretending it was for transportation, even though the walk between their houses took only 10 minutes. "We just want you to be happy," her mother would say, but the unspoken question hung in the air. How could she be happy living in such conditions? Even more challenging were the moments when Aduni questioned her own decision. Late at night, lying on their thin mattress in their cramped room, listening to the rain drip through the leaky roof, she would wonder if everyone else had been right. Had she chosen romance over practical wisdom? Had her pride in making an independent choice blinded her to the reality of what marriage to Kwame would actually mean? But then Kwame would sense her doubts without her saying anything. He would hold her hand in the darkness and remind her of all the reasons they had fallen in love. He would talk about their dreams for the future, about the business they would start together once they saved enough money, about the family they would build based on love rather than financial calculation. "Difficult times reveal character," he would whisper, "and every day you show me that I chose the right woman to share my life with." These conversations would restore Aduni's confidence temporarily, but the daily struggles remained. She was living a life she had never prepared for, in conditions that tested every assumption she had about marriage, love, and what it meant to build a life with someone. What she did not know was that every hardship she endured, every sacrifice she made, every moment of doubt she overcame, was being carefully observed by a man who was not at all what he appeared to be. The true test of their relationship was yet to come. And when it did, it would reveal truths that would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about the man she had married. By the time they had been married for 18 months, Aduni began noticing inconsistencies in Kwame's behavior that she could not explain. The first strange incident occurred on a Thursday afternoon, when she returned home unexpectedly early from the market, to find Kwame ending a phone conversation in what sounded like business English. "Yes, I understand the quarterly projections," she heard him say before he noticed her standing in the doorway. He quickly ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, but not before Aduni caught a glimpse of what appeared to be an expensive smartphone, not the basic model she thought he owned. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Wrong number," Kwame replied smoothly. "Someone looking for an engineer about some construction project." The explanation seemed reasonable, but something in his tone made Aduni feel like she was not getting the complete truth. Over the following weeks, she began paying closer attention to details she had previously overlooked. Despite their constant financial struggles, Kwame never seemed truly worried about money. While Aduni would lie awake at night calculating whether they could afford both food and rent, Kwame maintained an almost supernatural calm about their situation. When she expressed anxiety about their finances, he would always assure her that something would work out, and somehow, it always did. Mysterious small amounts of money would appear just when they needed them most. Kwame would claim he had found extra work or that someone had paid him more than expected for a job, but the timing was always too perfect. When their rent was due and they had no money, Kwame would disappear for a few hours and return with exactly the amount they needed. Where did this money come from? Aduni asked after one such incident. I helped Mr. Johnson move some furniture from his old house, Kwame explained. He paid me more than we agreed because the work was harder than expected. But when Aduni later mentioned this to Mama Sidi, the elderly woman looked confused. Mr. Johnson? He has been in Lagos for 2 months visiting his daughter. His house has been empty. These small discrepancies began to accumulate in Aduni's mind, like drops of water that eventually form a river. She started observing Kwame more carefully, and what she saw troubled her. His hands, which should have been rough and calloused from months of manual labor, remained surprisingly soft. His posture and manner of speaking, when he thought she was not paying attention, seemed more refined than someone from his claimed background should possess. One evening, she discovered a book hidden under their mattress, Advanced Corporate Finance and Investment Strategy. When she confronted Kwame about it, he claimed he had found it thrown away and was just curious about the contents. I like to read about things I do not understand, he said. Knowledge is free, even if you cannot afford university. Again, the explanation was plausible, but Aduni noticed that when she flipped through the book later, many passages were highlighted and annotated in handwriting that suggested deep understanding rather than casual curiosity. The phone calls became more frequent and more secretive. Kwame would step outside whenever his phone rang, and his conversations, when she could overhear them, involved terminology that seemed far too sophisticated for someone who supposedly worked as a manual laborer. She began to notice that certain people in the village treated Kwame differently than they treated other poor residents. While most beggars and laborers were ignored or dismissed, she observed that some of the more influential villagers would nod respectfully when they saw Kwame, almost as if they knew something about him that others did not. Oba Adeyemi, village king, stopped to talk with Kwame one afternoon, while Aduni watched from a distance. Their conversation appeared serious and lasted nearly 20 minutes. When she asked Kwame about it later, he said the king had simply been asking about job opportunities for other young men in the village. But Aduni had grown up in Ogbomoso, and she knew that Oba Adeyemi did not engage in casual 20-minute conversations with random laborers. The king's time was precious, and he only spent it on matters he considered important. Her growing suspicions were further fueled by an incident at the bank. While waiting in line to deposit her small tutoring earnings, Aduni noticed Kwame entering through the VIP entrance reserved for premium customers. She watched in confusion as bank staff greeted him with the kind of deference typically shown only to major account holders. When she mentioned seeing him at the bank, Kwame explained that he had been delivering documents for someone else. Rich people sometimes hire me to run errands because they trust me to be honest, he said. Each explanation was logical when considered individually, but together they formed a pattern that made no sense. Aduni found herself torn between love for her husband and a growing certainty that he was not the man he claimed to be. The breaking point came when she discovered a business card that had fallen from Kwame's pocket. It was expensive, embossed cardstock with gold lettering. The name read, Kwame Asante, Chief Executive Officer, Asante Industries Limited. The address listed was in Victoria Island, Lagos, one of the most expensive business districts in Nigeria. When Kwame returned home that evening, Aduni confronted him with the card. For the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. It fell from your pocket. Kwame, what is going on? Who are you really? For a long moment, he stared at the card in her hands. Then he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of love, regret, and something that looked almost like grief. Aduni, he said slowly, there are things about me that I have not told you, things that I hoped I would never have to explain. What things? What are you talking about? But before Kwame could answer, his phone rang with an urgency that made them both freeze. The ringtone was different from his usual phone, more sophisticated, more businesslike. As he reached for it, Aduni realized that her world was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The conversation she was about to overhear would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband, her marriage, and herself. The phone call that changed everything happened on a Monday morning, exactly 2 years after their wedding. Kwame had stepped outside to take what he claimed was another wrong number call. But this time Aduni followed him and positioned herself where she could hear both sides of the conversation through the thin walls of their building. "Sir, we need your immediate approval for the contract," a voice said with obvious urgency. "The government minister is waiting for your decision on the petroleum exploration rights. This deal is worth 47 billion naira, and our competitors are pressuring him for an answer." Aduni's blood turned cold as she heard her husband respond in a tone of authority she had never heard him use before. "Tell Minister Okafor that Asante Industries accepts the terms, but I want the environmental impact provisions strengthened before I sign anything, and make sure our legal team reviews every clause. 47 billion naira is not money we spend carelessly." The conversation continued for 15 more minutes, covering topics like offshore drilling platforms, international partnerships with multinational corporations, and investment strategies that involved amounts of money Aduni could barely comprehend. Her husband, the man she had married, believing he was penniless, was apparently making business decisions that affected billions of naira and thousands of jobs. When Kwame ended the call and turned around, he found Aduni standing behind him with tears streaming down her face. The look in her eyes was not anger or surprise, but something far worse. The devastating realization that her entire marriage had been built on a lie. "2 years," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For 2 years I have lived in poverty, been ridiculed by my community, disappointed my family, and sacrificed everything I had, believing that I was supporting a husband who had nothing. And you are one of the richest men in Nigeria." Kwame tried to reach for her, but she stepped backward as if his touch would burn her. "Aduni, please let me explain." "Explain what?" The words came out as a shout that surprised them both. "Explain how you watched me wear the same 3 dresses for 2 years because we could not afford new clothes. Explain how you let me eat once a day so there would be enough food for both of us. Explain how you allowed my family to be ashamed of me for marrying a beggar when you could have bought and sold half the village." The truth came tumbling out like water through a broken dam. Kwame Asante was the founder and chief executive officer of Asante Industries, one of West Africa's largest petroleum exploration and refining companies. His personal net worth exceeded 15 billion naira. He owned houses in Lagos, London, and New York. The company he had built employed over 12,000 people across 6 African countries. "But why?" Aduni asked, her voice breaking with each word. "Why would you do this to me? Why would anyone pretend to be poor?" Kwame's explanation was almost worse than the deception itself. He had come to Ogbomoso village, not as a poor man seeking work, but as a wealthy man seeking something money could not buy. A woman who would love him for who he was rather than what he owned. "Every woman I have ever known has wanted me for my wealth," he said, his voice heavy with years of disappointment. "I have been proposed to by women who did not even know my last name, but had heard about my bank account. I have been pursued by women who saw me as a business opportunity rather than a human being. I wanted to find someone who would choose me when I had nothing to offer except myself." The revelation that their entire relationship had been an elaborate test sent Aduni into a state of shock that bordered on psychological collapse. She realized that every moment of their marriage had been a performance. Every hardship they had shared had been unnecessary. Every sacrifice she had made had been meaningless. "So this was all an experiment?" she asked, her voice now strangely calm in a way that frightened Kwame more than her shouting had. "I was your laboratory rat, and poverty was your laboratory." "No, Aduni, that is not. You sat there and watched me cry over money for rent, while you probably had millions in the bank. You watched my parents suffer disappointment and shame, while you could have given them anything they dreamed of. You watched me become the laughingstock of my community, while you knew you could silence every critic with a single bank transfer." The psychological impact of the revelation was immediate and devastating. Aduni felt like her entire identity had been erased. The woman who had chosen love over wealth, who had stood up to her community's judgment, who had sacrificed everything for her principles, that woman had never existed. She had been nothing more than an actress in a play she did not know she was performing. As the full magnitude of the deception sank in, Something inside Aduni's mind began to fracture. The strong, independent woman who had defied her entire village for love was gone, replaced by someone who no longer knew what was real and what was performance in her own life. "I do not know who I am anymore," she whispered, and in that moment, Kwame realized that his elaborate test had destroyed the very thing he had been trying to find. The psychological breakdown began immediately after the revelation, but its full extent became clear over the following weeks. Aduni's mind, which had always been sharp and analytical, seemed unable to process the contradiction between the reality she had lived and the truth she had discovered. She would sit for hours staring at their tiny room, laughing in a way that made Kwame's skin crawl. "Look at this place," she would say to no one in particular. "Look at how we lived. Look at how I lived." Then the laughter would turn to sobbing, then back to laughter, creating a cycle that became more disturbing each day. The first public incident occurred at the village market 3 days after the revelation. Aduni walked through the stalls wearing the same faded dress she had worn for months, but now she was talking loudly to herself about money and deception. When Mama Bayadun approached her with concern, Aduni grabbed the older woman's hands and said, "Do you know my husband has 15 billion naira? Do you know I have been eating once a day while my husband could buy this entire market?" Mama Bayadun thought Aduni was joking or exaggerating, but the wild look in her eyes suggested something far more serious was happening. At home, Aduni's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would wake up in the middle of the night and count their meager possessions obsessively, muttering calculations about their monetary value. "This bowl cost 12 naira," she would announce at 3 o'clock in the morning. "We saved for 2 weeks to buy this bowl, but my husband could buy 1,000 bowls, 1,000,000 bowls." Kwame tried desperately to help her process what had happened. He arranged for them to move immediately to one of his luxury homes in Lagos, hoping that being surrounded by comfort and wealth might help her adjust to the truth. But the change only made things worse. In the magnificent Victoria Island mansion with its marble floors, crystal chandeliers and staff of 12, Aduni became even more disoriented. She would wander through the rooms, touching expensive furniture and artwork while laughing, that horrible laugh that had replaced her once beautiful smile. "This painting costs more than my father's house," she told the housekeeper one afternoon. "This sofa costs more than my entire dowry. But I have been washing my husband's 3 shirts by hand for 2 years because we could not afford a washing machine." She began having conversations with people who were not there, reliving moments from their marriage in Ogbomoso, but changing the details to reflect what she now knew about Kwame's wealth. She would set the dining room table for elaborate meals, then sit alone talking to an imaginary version of Kwame about business deals and investment strategies. The worst episodes involved her relationship with money itself. Kwame would find her sitting on the floor of his home office, surrounded by scattered naira notes, trying to count wealth that exceeded her ability to comprehend. She would pick up bundles of cash and smell them, trying to understand how something she had worried about constantly for 2 years had always been available in unlimited quantities. "I need to understand," she would say during these episodes. "I need to understand how much we had while I thought we had nothing." When well-meaning friends and family tried to visit, Aduni's responses were heartbreaking. To Folake, she said, "You told me I was wasting my life with a poor man, but you were wrong. I was wasting my life with a rich man who was pretending to be poor. Which is worse, do you think?" Her parents were devastated when they learnt the truth. Babatunde and Mama Kemi found themselves dealing not only with their daughter's mental breakdown, but also with their own complicated feelings about the situation. They had suffered social embarrassment for 2 years, believing their daughter had made a terrible mistake. Now they learned that she had actually married one of Nigeria's wealthiest men, but that the marriage had destroyed her psychologically. "We do not know whether to be proud or ashamed," Mama Kemi confided to her sister. "Our daughter married well, but look what it has done to her mind." The village's reaction to the revelation was equally complex. Some people felt vindicated in their criticism of the marriage, arguing that any union based on deception was doomed to fail. Others felt guilty about how they had treated Aduni during her supposed poverty, realizing they had been mocking the wife of one of the country's most successful businessmen. But for Aduni, the community's changing attitude was just another layer of psychological torture. The same people who had whispered behind her back, about her poor choices now tried to befriend her because of her husband's wealth. Their sudden shift from pity to envy confirmed her growing belief that human relationships were nothing more than financial calculations dressed up as emotions. Kwame hired the best psychiatrists and psychologists in Lagos, but none of them could undo the damage caused by 2 years of systematic deception. The doctors explained that Aduni was suffering from a severe form of psychological trauma caused by the complete invalidation of her lived experience and identity. She built her sense of self around the idea that she was a woman who chose love over wealth. One psychiatrist explained to Kwame, when she discovered that this choice was based on false information, her entire identity collapsed. She no longer knows who she is or what she believes about herself and the world. The tragedy was not just that Kwame had deceived Aduni, but that his deception had destroyed the very qualities that had made him fall in love with her. The strong, independent woman who had defied her community for her principles was gone, replaced by someone who could no longer trust her own judgment about anything. As months passed, it became clear that Aduni's condition was not improving. The woman who had once been the pride of Ogbomoso village now lived in a world where reality and deception were impossible to distinguish, where every emotion felt false and every relationship seemed like a potential lie. Today, 3 years after the revelation that shattered her world, Aduni lives in a private treatment facility outside Lagos, where she receives round-the-clock care from mental health professionals who specialize in trauma recovery. Some days are better than others. On good days, she can hold conversations about current events and even discuss her accounting background with clarity and insight. On difficult days, she returns to that obsessive counting and the haunting laughter that has replaced the joy that once defined her. Kwame visits every week, though the doctors have advised him that his presence sometimes triggers her worst episodes. During one lucid moment, Aduni told him something that has haunted him ever since. "You wanted to know if I would love you without your money, but what you really did was teach me that love itself might be just another lie we tell ourselves." The irony of their situation is profound and heartbreaking. Kwame had everything he thought he wanted, a woman who had chosen him despite apparent poverty, who had sacrificed social status and comfort for love, but his method of testing her authenticity had destroyed the very relationship he was trying to protect. The village of Ogbomoso learned lessons they had never expected to learn. The community that had once judged Aduni for marrying beneath her station now understood that their assumptions about wealth, status, and worth had been as flawed as Kwame's assumptions about love and authenticity. Obayemi, the village king, speaks about the situation during community gatherings. "We thought we knew what we were seeing," he tells the assembled villagers. "But we learned that none of us can truly know another person's circumstances. We also learned that deception, even with good intentions, destroys more than it protects." Mama Kemi visits her daughter regularly at the treatment facility. During these visits, she has gained insights that she shares with other mothers in the village. "We always worried about our children marrying for the wrong reasons," she said, "but we never considered that someone might lie about having the wrong reasons when they actually had all the right ones." Falake, Aduni's best friend, carries her own burden of guilt. She realizes that her constant advice to marry for security may have contributed to Aduni's vulnerability to Kwame's deception. "I taught her to judge men by their bank accounts," Falake admits. "Maybe if I had taught her to judge them by their honesty, this tragedy could have been avoided." The doctors treating Aduni have learned from her case as well. Her condition has contributed to research about the psychological impact of systematic deception in intimate relationships. One of her psychiatrists published a paper titled, "When Reality Becomes Performance: The Mental Health Consequences of Identity-Based Deception," that has influenced how therapists approach similar cases. But perhaps the most important lessons come from examining what went wrong and why. Kwame's fundamental error was believing that love could be tested, like a scientific hypothesis. He treated Aduni like a subject in an experiment rather than a partner in a relationship. His desire to find authentic love led him to create the most inauthentic possible foundation for a marriage. The tragedy reveals the dangerous assumptions that people make about wealth, poverty, and human motivation. Kwame assumed that all women who would love a rich man were somehow false or mercenary. The village assumed that a poor man could not be worthy of their most beautiful daughter. Both assumptions were rooted in the belief that money determines human worth and authentic emotion. For families watching this tale unfold, the lessons are clear but complicated. Parents who pressure their children to marry for financial security might inadvertently make them vulnerable to exactly the kind of deception that destroyed Adoni. Children who will against their parents' financial priorities might find themselves making decisions based on incomplete information, as Adoni did. The most haunting aspect of their story is that it began with genuine love. Adoni and Kwame truly cared for each other, shared intellectual and emotional compatibility, and could have built a strong marriage based on mutual respect and affection. The deception was not necessary for their relationship to succeed. It only ensured that it would fail. Today, as Adoni continues her long journey towards psychological recovery, her story serves as a reminder that trust, once broken by systematic deception, may never fully heal. The woman who once defied an entire community for love has learned that sometimes the greatest threats to our happiness come not from external opposition, but from the lies told by those we trust most. As you reflect on this tale of love, deception, and the price of testing human authenticity, consider the relationships in your own life. Are you building connections based on honesty and genuine respect, or are you testing people without their knowledge? Are you making assumptions about others based on appearances, or are you seeking to understand the complete truth of who they are? The story of Adoni and Kwame reminds us that love cannot be tested without being destroyed, that wealth means nothing without integrity, and that the most beautiful woman in the village can become its greatest tragedy when truth and deception become impossible to distinguish. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and remember that in a world full of assumptions and deceptions, the greatest gift we can offer each other is simply the truth.